The Panasonic GH5 is almost my perfect video camera. I absolutely love this thing, but there's just a few things that irk me about it. First of all, because it's a small sensor, it's not great with shallow depth of field. Yeah, we have 2.8 lenses, but they just don't look the same on an APS-C or a full frame sensor. So if you like that shallow depth of field look, this probably isn't the best camera for you. Another problem with having a really small sensor is that we don't have very good ISO performance. Yes, the GH5S is much better, but if you want that stabilized sensor, you're gonna go with the GH5, and it's just not great. And then third, which is a big one for a lot of people, is continuous autofocus while recording. The GH5's autofocus is simply not reliable enough, in my opinion, to use ever while recording. So everybody who shoots with Canon and who shoots with Sony always says, how the hell do you use that camera and not autofocus? I just leave autofocus on all the time. I've been excited to switch to a camera with autofocus, but I've just been waiting for that perfect camera that has everything I need. And Sony may have just come out with that camera. This is the Sony a6400. This is not quite out yet, but Sony just sent us this review unit. And because we're in Puerto Rico, we only get to play with this for 2 days. So I haven't had much time at all, but I have been able to put this camera through its paces. Now, when this camera was first announced, I immediately pre-ordered it because it looked like it had everything I wanted. It was a small camera, it could shoot in 4K. It was one of Sony's first cameras that could actually shoot unlimited video. Every other camera that I've seen has to be hacked if you wanted to shoot over 30 minutes. That was huge for me. It's supposed to have the best autofocus of any Sony camera ever, and Sony's autofocus is already incredible. Because it has a larger sensor, it's going to have that shallow depth of field, and hopefully it also has better ISO performance as well. And I forgot to mention the best part, this thing only costs $900. So in my mind, I thought at the very least, this will be the ultimate B camera. It will be the best second camera you could ever have, and it's so cheap at just 900 bucks. So I put it to the test. For the first test, I did a simple ISO performance test, and what I found was that the 6400 is about 2.5 stops better when it comes to ISO performance over our GH5. Now keep in mind that the GH5S is approximately 2 stops better than the GH5, so this is a slight improvement over the GH5S, but keep in mind it's $900. The GH5S is like $2,300 right now, so it's really not in the same league at all. Now, I don't have any fast lenses to test with this camera to show you guys the shallow depth of field, but because the GH5 is a micro 4/3 sensor and this is an APS-C size sensor, it's a larger sensor, it will create a shallower depth of field with a similar speed lens. So a 2.8 lens on this camera will look significantly shallower than a 2.8 lens on a smaller sensor camera. Now, moving over to the autofocus test, this was really incredible. I mean, this camera does such an amazing job of finding a human face and then locking onto an eye. And then if you don't even have a human, if something is moving around the frame, you can touch on the screen, lock onto it, and it will follow that subject around. It can move forward or back away from the camera, and it does an amazing job of keeping it in focus. I could never do that manually. Now, although the continuous autofocus can be amazing, I did run into some situations where the camera would still randomly hunt for autofocus when I was shooting a stationary subject. For instance, when I was doing my ISO test, you can see the camera hunting here, and that completely wrecks footage in my opinion, and it makes me want to flip the camera back into manual focus. And maybe if I had it on a gimbal or if I was going to be doing vlogging stuff, it would be perfect. But if you're gonna be shooting a stationary subject with a tripod, it's probably best to flick it over to manual. So you're probably thinking, man, this seems like the ultimate camera. It's only 900 bucks and it seems like it's better than the GH5 in almost every way. Well, not quite. There's a few quirks that I have with this camera. First of all, when I did a rolling shutter test, you can see it doesn't compete at all with the GH5. This thing has jello like crazy. So if you're gonna be doing any panning or quick movement, that's going to be a problem. Sony has done some updating to the screen and the way it articulates here, and it actually pulls up and out so that you can see a selfie camera on the front, which is great. I really appreciate that. But a lot of vloggers have pointed out that you're going to want to add some sort of shotgun mic onto the top of the camera, and it will completely block this screen. I personally think the GH5 screen is better because it pops out to the side, gives you a lot more room to work. Now, when it comes to battery life on this camera, it's not great. It's the same battery in the a6300. It's also the same sensor as well. So if you're looking for a bump in image quality, you're not going to get that. And if you're hoping to get some more battery life out of the camera, you're not going to get that either. If slow motion is important to you, the GH5 can shoot in 4K at 60 frames per second. This would be locked at 30 frames a second, or you're gonna have to drop down into 1080. That's definitely a bummer as well. One other huge feature that you're gonna be missing with this camera when you compare it to other Sonys or the GH5 is that the sensor is not stabilized in this camera. So if you're using this without a lens that has stabilization and it's got that horrific rolling shutter, the footage is really going to look bad. We handhold our GH5 all the time, and with the dual stabilization, with the sensor and the lens working together to stabilize your footage, it's almost like magic. It's so good. And so if I had to choose between continuous autofocus or stabilization so that I didn't have to travel with a tripod, for the type of shooting I do, I'm choosing stabilization every time. One other quirk that bugs me about this camera, and if you're a Sony user, you're probably used to it, I don't like the fact that they've put the SD card slot next to the battery underneath the camera. I am constantly filming short little clips and I just want to pull the card out quickly and pop it back in real quickly. And with this, I'm constantly having to take the camera off the tripod, get to it, put the camera back on, transfer the card, come back, take the camera off the tripod, put it back. I really don't like the design of that, but it's probably whatever you get used to. So the huge photo meme that's going on right now is, does it have dual card slots? This does not, the GH5 does. I'm not the type of guy to be shooting my videos with 2 cards anyway, so that doesn't really bother me, but there is one huge, simple feature that I completely overlooked. I did not even realize that this camera was missing it because I just assumed, of course it has to have it. And then I just read online, this camera does not have a headphone jack. So that completely changes what you can do with this camera. Yes, it's still an incredible B camera or second camera, but if you're the type of person that wanted to use this as a vlogging camera, you need to be able to check your audio. You have to be able to monitor audio because I guarantee you something will go wrong. Every time we don't have headphones and we go, let's just take the clip, it's gonna be fine. Something happens every time. There's static, there's clicking, the batteries die on something. So you're going to have to monitor audio. I can't believe Sony didn't put the headphone jack in this camera. It almost feels like they didn't put it in there on purpose to push people to spend a little bit more on the next level up. Now, years ago, we shot almost exclusively Nikon and everyone called me a Nikon fanboy, and I haven't picked up a Nikon camera in years. I shoot almost exclusively on Panasonic now, and I'm sure I'm gonna get called a Panasonic fanboy now, but keep in mind, I just bought the Sony a7 III. It's the first Sony I've ever purchased, so I am part of this ecosystem. I'm rooting for Sony. I hope they come out with the most incredible cameras in the world. And if something comes out that's significantly better than our GH5s, I'm gonna jump on that. I'm excited about that. But right now, the GH5, years later after buying it, is still such an incredible camera. I really don't have much of a reason to switch. And although I was very excited about the a6400 and I did pre-order it, because of what I've learned about this camera in these tests, I'm going to cancel my pre-order and I'm going to wait for the Sony a7S III or the a9S, whatever they call it. It's gonna be their low light professional video camera beast. I'm very excited about that camera, and I think that's probably the best camera for me. Hopefully you enjoyed this quick review. If you'd like more information like this, you can head over to fstoppers.com for daily free content. And if you'd like to check out our full-length photography tutorials, you can head over to fstoppers.com/store.